unless you change and become like children, Jesus says. I wrote much of this sermon this week while watching my almost 1-year-old. I figured that was a good thing to do since Jesus is telling us to become like little children. As he cruised along a table on our back patio, he had this marker in his hand, cap on, but it didn't matter because he just liked waving it around and then looking up to see my face as he was doing so. Was I watching? Was I smiling back? His eyes were wide with wonder and maybe just a little bit of mischief. This delight at the new skills that he was discovering, now almost walking. And along with them, his awakening sense to take in the world around him. Simply standing on his own, running his hand back and forth across that table, feeling the texture of the surface, brought him deep joy, as does eating dirt and sticks in the garden, we've learned. While his mom walked the dog the other day, and I made my coffee, he spent 15 minutes on the floor next to me, fascinated with a wooden spatula and a small pot, just sort of stirring and banging and making noise. It doesn't take fancy toys after all, which apparently gave him just enough rhythm. He started feeling it in his body, and he starts bobbing back and forth as he's banging it around. If you saw him up here a couple weeks ago when he was baptized, you saw him sort of dancing as Gary played, almost like he was in a club. Apparently it doesn't take much, just a banging of a pot. The sermon isn't about my child, but I start in this way as an invitation for you to imagine the children in your life. And I want to begin by really asking you to imagine your own children, nieces, nephews, nibblings, grandchildren, neighborhood kids, students, mentees. I want you to ask, how often do you pay attention to them? Like truly just watch them, just notice them, just pause to delight in them being themselves. Do you ever do that? I think it could be like worth doing an entire sermon series dedicated just to exploring the spiritual lessons that we can learn from the children among us, from watching the children. Unless you become like little children, Jesus says. You cannot inherit, you cannot enter, you cannot understand the realm of God. Jesus isn't talking about going to heaven when we die. He's talking about our ability to receive, to enter into the presence of God, the divine mystery, to truly know a depth of love, of presence in this life, in this world, that mystery that's woven through the fabric of creation. A realm that children seem much more ready and willing and able to enter than we do as adults. Right? We seem to lose that sense of magic, that openness, that wonder, and then we call it growing up, as if it's better, as if it's just childish, something to leave behind, to live, embody that way of being. I think Jesus would call what we call growing up something of a tragedy. In order to offer such a teaching that Jesus does, he doesn't just look out at the children and think, oh, how cute. Isn't it nice to have them there making their noises as long as they don't interrupt us? He doesn't just offer a patronizing pat on the head. He doesn't just welcome the children to be present when he spoke, when people gathered, and that sort of seen not heard mode, as the old saying goes. He doesn't find their presence. He doesn't find their fidgeting, their constant babbling, their whispering to one another a disruption. Nor does he find their disruption to be a nuisance. In fact, when the disciples try to keep the children from Jesus, thinking that the children are a nuisance. It's not their place to be here in this serious mode with Jesus. That's for the adults. When they try to keep the children from him, Jesus, the Gospel of Matthew, it a little bit harsher. It says that Jesus grew indignant with them and rebuked them, more along the lines of the sort of "get behind me, Satan," that he offers to Peter not long after. For the King of heaven, the realm of God, belongs to them. Do not keep them from me. Almost as though they hold the keys to the kingdom, not Peter. Not priests or pastors, not church councils or trustees. The kingdom of heaven, and if that, then perhaps we could also add the church, belongs to them. Jesus paid enough attention to the children, like he did to everything else in our world that we as adults tend to overlook or downplay or minimize or throw away: the mustard seed, the weeds, the sparrows, and so on. They become the center of Jesus' ministry, his own life. Jesus paid close enough attention to them to learn from them, to notice that they possess something that adults do not, or at least that most of us, again, we lose on our journey to adulthood. It gets stamped out maybe in those sort of middle ages of preteen and teen. And that the children don't simply need us to grow up, to teach them how to be functioning citizens and capable humans, but that we need them to remember a fuller humanity, sense of what it means to be alive, to reclaim a life that's worth living, that can truly pause and delight and be present in the fullness of this moment, and to create then a society that is worth living in. And I wonder how much, or if or how much, of Jesus' capacity to be so fully present in the moment in these ways was itself inspired by and deepened by the children around him as he watched them. Is that one of the spiritual lessons that he learned from them? He goes on to say, "Do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has worries of its own. It will take care of itself. Do not worry about all these things. Just be with that dandelion in front of you, with that dirt in your hand, the stick in your hand. Just be." Was that something that he learned from the children amongst him? I wonder, unless you become like children, how much did Jesus himself have to work at that, to remain like a child in his own society, with its own expectations of what it means to be an adult? And that in a world that truly thought that way, acted that way, he continually pushed against that mode, that way of being, and sought to be more like the children amongst him. What are those lessons I have learned? What are those lessons you have yet to learn? Those were sort of the questions I was pondering as I sat with this passage. Again, those spiritual lessons that we could learn from the children. How am I changed by the presence of children around me, such that I am able to become more like them? Have you ever sat with that kind of a question? Not just how to raise them to be more like you, to shape them into a good adult, but to be more like them? How are they calling you to be changed? Think about it in your life. When you are in the presence of children, how are you changed? How are you able to receive something of the divine presence and mystery and love the magic of being human and alive that you don't when you are just perhaps surrounded by serious adults, preoccupied by grown-up things. I'm not an unserious person in much of my life. I am also an uncle to 13 nibblings, 13 nieces and nephews. I have loved being Uncle Eric. And since the first one, there's this different part of me I know that I realize comes alive when I am with them, when I get immersed into their world for a bit and the rest of this just all goes away for a little while. The playfulness, the wonder, the questions, the frustrations, the self-expression, the limits, the learning. This was intensified, you can imagine, perhaps relate, to the nth degree when I became a parent for the first time last July. Right? From those early weeks of somehow both utter overwhelm, of exhaustion so consuming that I felt like I was the walking dead, and I don't know how anybody made it through, survived. It was a minor miracle. But it was both that and this awe so amazing that this tiny human being who didn't exist and now does was being entrusted to our care. Right? Through the intense transitions that followed of caring for and nurturing and raising another human and what it requires of you, how deep you have to dig at 3 a.m. when they have big feelings and you just want to sleep. Time and time again, since those early weeks of parenthood, I've continually felt this sense of being reborn in far-reaching, radical ways. I am not who I was before him, or even months ago. He has changed me. Every day I am in awe of two thoughts: that we are shaping a human. How crazy is that? We are shaping a human by the love that we give, the attention that we give, and perhaps fail to give. And the second thought is, he, our child, our children, they are reshaping us. Certainly, Shrestha and I as parents. Let the little children come, and they will change you in radical ways. They will teach you. They will bring back to life a part of you, the child that remains in you, but has long been buried. Here, I think it's worth mentioning that Jesus isn't romanticizing children. I don't mean to romanticize children this morning. He's not inviting us to do that. Like adults, children can be very difficult. And it's not to say that they don't need guidance or instruction. Of course they do. It's not that we should revolve our lives entirely around their whims and their needs and deny any of our own or any of ours as a unit, as a larger community. But this assumption that forms our starting point oftentimes in our society and in Jesus is that what the children need from us, what we have to give them, how we need to shape them, is precisely the kind of assumption that Jesus and his audience would have maintained, and that Jesus, in his teachings, was trying to flip on its head, was trying to upend. That is what Jesus was always doing with his teachings, flipping that common wisdom, those assumptions, on their head and saying, you're missing it. You're missing the point. And in fact, because of how we operate our assumptions, they keep us locked, our world locked in cycles of injustice and inequity and in retribution, locked into cycles of fear and ego and scarcity. And in Jesus' own day, to these assumptions would have been added that children, they're really here to serve us. They have actually no full personhood of their own. They had no rights. They belonged almost more like property to their parents, or let's be real, to their fathers. And their primary value was not in themselves, but and the fact that they would one day inherit their father's property and name and perpetuate it. Keep the legacy alive, you might say. That was their primary value. This is why the disciples are trying to keep the children away from Jesus. They do not matter yet. Come back to us in a few years when you're grown, and we'll count you on the attendance sheet. Even the religious world of Jesus' day reflected this sense of valuation of children. Worship was primarily a duty, an obligation, an expectation for men. Some communities also created sacred spaces for women, though they were usually separate. But to have them worshiping alongside one another, to worship with the children as families, that was virtually unheard of in Jesus' day, in his cultural context. Would it not have even occurred to most people? Which is why Jesus' teaching, again, is so shocking to the disciples, unexpected. And apparently, though, this tradition, this shocking valuation of children, it was so central to Jesus' ministry that in contrast with the rest of their society, the early church that formed after Jesus' death, they made this a central part of their worshiping, their gathering community. Families and children were central. Their presence wasn't about making older adults feel good about themselves. Oh, phew, the children are back in the pews. We can just carry on as usual now. It was a response to taking seriously the question, how much and in what ways do we really value children, the most vulnerable among us? It's one more iteration of that question, the most vulnerable among us, how much do we value them? Do we let the children come? Or have we created barriers to their being present here? Do we invite them to full participation? Or do we just sort of imagine them to be little blobs and that we sort of send them off out into some other room to do whatever children do while we do the adult important stuff, the real thing in here? Do we not just let them be present, but value their presence for the ways that the Spirit of God is alive in and through them, and what they thus have to teach us about what it means to be fully alive? And so I leave you this morning with a couple of questions. And I want to challenge us to sit with, not just today, not just in the weeks and months ahead, but in the years that follow as a church, as a community. In the past year, we've had a growing number of children and their families join this congregation in this little experiment that we call our federated church community, our attempt to build a little society around these values that we hold deepest. What would it look like for us to take seriously the presence of children, to value their participation, their formation, as much as our own adult participation and formation, to welcome their disruptions, their cooings, their babbling, their need to move and crawl around, not just as disruptions, but perhaps to see those disruptions even as inspiration, as a reminder itself for each of us to perhaps just be in our bodies a little bit more, maybe a little bit less in our heads. Maybe that itself, maybe it wasn't the sermon that you needed to hear this morning, but you needed to see that kid being simply who they are, and that is the message that God has for you this morning. What if we truly valued the presence of all of the little ones amongst us? How might we think about our budget or our space, our sanctuary, the flow of worship, the music that we sing? How might we think about all of this differently if we take Jesus seriously? That unless we become like children, we cannot enter the realm of God. That if we hinder the children from coming to Jesus, from being present and participating, that we cannot receive the realm of God? Are we capable of truly seeing them, of watching them with hearts and minds open enough to learn from them? Are we willing to change? To make changes to our lives, to our collective life, as we welcome them? I wonder what different part of us might come alive in their presence. I wonder how we, individually, but also as a church, might ourselves be reborn, born anew on that journey. May it be so, for the flourishing of our children, for the flourishing of all God's beloved children. Amen.